Timothy Gaven was at the pontoon table when the announcement was made throughout the ship that there was an outbreak of bacterial meningitis and everyone was to head to their room. Swallowing the rest of his rum in one gulp, he watched as many of the other lemmings in the casino left their tables. He watched as they wander away from potential paydays. Some of them even left their chips behind, not even bothering to cash them out. Something that struck Timothy as dumber than burning bills to keep yourself warm. Timothy was a professional pontoon player, easily one of the best in the world. He played in Neapoli, in Carthage, and even in Newtown, and he was practicing his craft in the casino of the Naglfari. Another secondary prize he won from tying with a dealer 3 times in a single game while playing in Comet. The cruise was pleasant enough. The only downside is it was during the month where he had to spend watching Michael, his child. But fortunately, in addition to the world-class casino and buffet, the Naglfari had a kids zone that would watch his kid during the day. "Sir, last round?" the dealer asked Timothy. The dealer had a name tag on, but Timothy never bothered to check. The dealer was just the dealer, no matter where you went. Names didn't matter. Timothy had just won another round, and he easily tripled his money already. But he was so certain he could make 10 times that if the game just kept going. Especially since all the weak lemmings had already left. There was just the dealer, Timothy, and another man. Someone who introduced himself to Timothy earlier, but Timothy wasn't paying attention. Some kind of doctor or something? Dr. Fire, Dr. Fast, Dr. Festus, Dr. Hephaestus, Faust, something like that. "I'd rather keep playing if it's all the same to you," Timothy said. The doctor laughed and smiled. "I like the way this man thinks. You win some, so keep winning until you win it all," the doctor said with a large smile and wearing mirrored shades, even indoors. If Timothy was to guess, it would have been to help his bluff game. The captain did say we have to go to our rooms, and I could lose my... Before the dealer finished, the doctor removed a single golden coin from his pocket and placed it in front of the dealer. The coin was the same size as a pontoon chip, 39 millimeters. But being made of gold rather than plastic, it was a lot heavier than any chip had a right to be. But it was worth a lot more than even a purple or orange chip, but not quite as much as a gray chip. 1 aura per round. Think of it as a way of saying thank you for your time. I don't think you get tipped this much normally, the doctor told the dealer. Timothy could see the wheels turning in the dealer's head. The dealer might make that much money in a single trip, but then again, he probably didn't. "I'm still not sure. Quarantine procedures are pretty strict," the dealer said, gently pushing the golden coin back to the dealer, who held up his hand. "We'll stop as soon as you want. Think about it. The 2 of us, a round will last, maybe 1 or 2 minutes. See if we make 21 or if you do. How many rounds can that make in 10 minutes? 5 or 10? That's 10 new gold coins for you. You can go from dealing to playing at that rate." The doctor enticed the dealer. Timothy was intrigued. Whoever this doctor was, he wanted to play him. He was confident, suave, and smooth. Everything that Timothy thought he was. But this doctor was something else. Fine, just for 10 minutes, the dealer agreed as he dealt out the cards. Already, Timothy could see he had great cards. An ace of spades and a queen of spades. A perfect 21. In Pontoon, the goal was to get as close to 21 as you could without going over. Anyone who already got a 21 had already won. Keeping his smile to himself, he waited for the doctor and the dealer to move. Sure enough, the dealer had a Jack of Hearts, and the doctor looked as confident as ever. The dealer flipped his last card, revealing an Ace of Hearts, and the doctor laid down his cards, an Ace of Diamonds and a King of Diamonds. "Oh, I guess that's a push," the doctor said, removing another golden aura, setting it down in front of the dealer, before putting even more chips in front of himself, betting even more on the next round. Not one to be intimidated, Timothy raised his chips even higher. The doctor smiled widely, putting a single chip higher on his wage pile. Timothy responded by matching, adding just one more chip also. There was something in his opponent's smile. It reminded him all too much of those salesmen who knew that they'd already had the sale, and they were just sweetening the deal. Timothy glanced at his newly dealt cards. He had a 10 of clubs and a 9 of diamonds. A really good hand, even if it wasn't perfect. The first card dealt flipped on the dealer's side showed a 3 of spades, so the dealer laid another card on his side. The doctor wiggled a single finger, indicated he was waiting for another card to be dealt with him. Sure enough, the dealer dealt the card to the doctor. Then, with everyone putting their cards face down, the dealer flipped his cards first, revealing first an 8 of hearts with the 4 of clubs to go with the 3 of spades. A total of 15. Timothy flipped his cards over, revealing his 19. It would take a much, much better hand to win over that. The doctor flipped over his first card, a King of Diamonds. Next, a Queen of Hearts. And his final card, the Jack of Spades. In professional games of Pontoon, like this, the deck was made up of 4 separate standard decks, so it's not unusual for cards to repeat. Still, 2 Kings of Diamonds in a row had about a 1 in 43,264 chance of occurring, give or take some. What was even more unusual was, regardless of what card the doctor got from the dealer, when he indicated he needed another card, the doctor would have won with 20 easily. Most professional Pontoon players would be happy with an 18, since you can't go over 21. A 20 on your opening hand? Timothy had not known a single Pontoon player, professional or amateur, who would ask for another card after that. Timothy felt his smile widen as he grabbed the chips on the table. The doctor produced another golden coin, giving it to the dealer. "Ah, a very good hand. It's a shame. I was hoping for an ace, but oh well, all is fair in cards and bars," the doctor said as he stood up, checking his watch. "I believe I've played long enough. But with any luck, I'll see you both in Imperial City." "Oh, you have business in Imperial City? What are you, a politician?" Timothy asked, tallying up his chips. The doctor surely had the smile of a politician. Every hand he played, good or bad, his smile never faltered or faded. Timothy could imagine that smile on every screen in Imperial City, telling everyone that Princess Petal perished from pertussis. After asking the doctor, though, if he was a politician, the smile faltered for a moment. The doctor had a look of pure rage for a single moment. Timothy had never seen so much anger on one face before. It was like the doctor was a caldera about to erupt. But then the smile returned, and he chuckled softly for a moment. Oh no, just business, I'm afraid. I've never been one for politics. What, you have too much heart for it? No, nothing like that. Politics is just too honest a game these days for me to enjoy myself. With that last strange statement, the doctor stepped away from the table, leaving the last of his chips behind. And then after a moment, the dealer finally spoke. What's with that guy? Timothy shrugged. I don't know. Does that mean I get his leftover chips since you forfeit? The dealer shook his head. No, normally chips would go back to the house, and I've already broken enough rules that it is, so I'll be taking these. He said, collecting the chips the doctor left behind, while he pointed to the bank against the wall. I'm not sure if the banker is still there, but I'm betting on probably. If he's not there, please go back to your room and you can exchange your chips for cash later. You seem awfully calm while everyone else is panicking, Timothy pointed out. He did appreciate anyone who wasn't a lemming and doing what they were told just because it was what they were told. But then again, in his experience, dealers were the very definition of a lemming, always following a rule and, despite the nature of their job, never taking risks. Still, it was nice that this dealer stuck around. Well, this isn't the first outbreak I've experienced. I thought this was the Naglfari's first trip. It is, but it's not my first trip. Quarantine procedures are always the same. Everyone goes to the room for a few hours, the deck gets cleaned up, the doctor checks out the sick, then the sick stay in their cabins while everyone else has a good time. We'll probably do another announcement in an hour or so saying the Vanguard won't be coming. The dealer counted up his coins and started walking to the employees-only area. You better hurry, though. You don't want to get caught by security, the dealer warned, just before he disappeared behind the door. Now picking up his winnings, Timothy made his way over to the bank, on the other side of the now empty casino. Every other light was now off, leaving just enough light to walk by, if there was an emergency. Still, a cold shiver ran up Timothy's back, from the all-too-quiet nature of the casino. Casinos were full of life and loss. That was part of what appealed to him. The bright lights above, the laughter of the winners, the cries of the losers, the loud voices of the dealers and the pit bosses balancing them all out, the smell of alcohol from nearly every table, and the sweet scent of a freshly opened deck when the dealer had a new game to sit over. But now, the lights were dim. The reds and orange seemed less energetic and felt more like a warning. Like there was a great tragedy here, and it was warning them of it happening again. The empty chairs all had no one sitting in them, but still Timothy could feel like there was something in every chair, and it was staring him down. An irrational thought he kept pushing down as he kept making his way towards the bank. As he stepped past chairs that were pushed back haphazardly, or in some cases left discarded on the ground. Lemmings, Timothy said to himself, not even willing to clean up after themselves. Glasses, cards, purses, and on one table, a pale rubber prosthetic arm was left behind. Timothy would have thought when the captain sent all guests and staff to the rooms that at least a janitor or two would have stayed out on the floor and cleaned up the important parts of the ship, such as the casino. Who even knows what bacterial meningitis is anyway? I bet he made it up for some quiet time, Timothy said as he got closer to the bank. Unlike the rest of the casino, it was still fully lit up, with the words bank in yellow neon lit up, even though the K was already flickering, making it look like ban for a moment. The bank was well secured. 5 teller windows with bulletproof glass and only a small slot underneath to allow for the trade of currency for chips, chips for currency, or currency for currency. To both sides of the teller windows were 2 ATMs, allowing for the guests to pull out their life savings to spend on raffle wheels, one-armed bandits, pontoon, or bones. But the actual act of changing coins for chips was always handled by humans. People got easily upset by the idea of people counting their chips. They fear machine mistakes, and it felt impersonal compared to counting out bills or stacking coins, counting it alongside the teller, making sure they weren't cheating you. And of course, seeing the chips slide through the slot, counted one at a time, from the banker to the guest. That was a feeling that Timothy knew a machine could never simulate. Especially when he came back with more chips than he left with. Then the banker's smile would falter, just for a moment, but then it would come back. This time fake rather than firm. And then Timothy would have the pleasure of sliding over the chips one at a time, and have the banker return with coins both silver and gold to exchange for the chips. Timothy would then leave with the satisfaction in his heart, and in coins in his purse. The best part of international cruise ships like the Naglfari, the banks with them had to deal with multiple currencies from all over the world. Sesterces, wen, shekels, reo, deben, daryak, and even quachli. But Timothy's favorite currency to get paid back in was from the 7 cities. While most of the civilized world had moved on from gold and silver standards to cotton and plastic blend bills or digital old transactions, the 7 cities still used copper, silver, and gold, with the imperial family's crest still on every single coin. Some politicians across Europa argued it was because the emperor was so old-fashioned. He was not willing to update from the 2200s to the 2700s, like everyone else, and that the next emperor would not be willing to change because of tradition. Some historians argued it was because the last few times they tried to transition from gold to bills, that there were riots in the street, so they were not willing to update. Nearly every business professional argued it was a good thing the 7 cities never updated from centi, denarii, and auras, because it gave the 7 cities stability and value that was never afforded to every other currency. Obviously, Timothy preferred to believe in the business professionals. The wealthiest individuals on the planet liked to keep the majority of their assets in the 7 cities. It was hard to trace gold auras and hard to tax it, when most countries the currency of the 7 cities was barely considered an asset, not even real money, and thus taxed at a much, much lower rate compared to bills that could go up or down in value quite wildly. There's even a story shared in gambler circles about a gambler who used sesterces during a 4-hour-long game of pontoon. He won the entire pot, chips worth over 100 times what he spent on the game, but when he went back to exchange his chips for sesterces, he was given less than what he had to start with, because there was a massive drop in value while he was playing, and he never got the news until after he exchanged his chips. Whether that story was true, or even realistic, didn't matter to Timothy. The important part of the story was if you tried to trust anything except 7 cities gold, then you were playing a much greater gamble with the bank than if you didn't choose the 7 cities coin. Standing at the center window, the only open teller window, All the others had security gates down. Looking inside, Timothy couldn't see anyone there. But still, with how lit up everything was, the teller had to be inside. Maybe they were in the back, counting the chips and the cash. Growing impatient, Timothy rang the bell next to the window. The ding rang across the empty, dark casino like a pebble plunging into a placid pond. The peace now disturbed, Timothy let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. But with the peace gone, and no consequences as far as he could see, he felt more comfortable to be loud in the empty casino. It felt less like a library. Ringing the bell again before knocking on the bulletproof glass, he called out, "Hello? Can I get some service, please? Look, I know we're supposed to be in our rooms, but just let me exchange my chips for Senti and I'll be on my way." He could hear sudden movement and even a crash inside, but still, there was no teller. They must have fallen asleep and were just woken up. Or maybe they were drinking and were just now goaded into action. Another lazy lemming in Timothy's eyes. The one thing a lemming is supposed to do: follow directions. And this one can't even do that right. "You better get out here before I tell your manager. You have one job. Do it or you'll have no job," Timothy yelled at the glass, his voice bouncing off and echoing throughout the casino. He could hear shuffling inside that was gradually growing closer. Letting out a sigh, he rested his back on the divider separating the teller windows. And he checked his watch. Where did those 30 minutes go? He didn't spend that long at the table, did he? And while Timothy thought about his timeline, trying to figure out where the missing 10 minutes went, he heard a knock at the glass. Finally, Timothy sighed out loud as he looked around to see the teller on the glass. His first thought when he saw the banker was that he had to be drunk. The banker had a single outstretched hand on the glass, palms flat on the glass, and his face pressed hard against the glass, practically smashed against it like a surrealist piece of art. The teller's eyes were yellow as egg yolk, with streaks of red from the blood vessels, spider webbing from the dark pools of pupil and iris, both now the same dark color. The teller's lips were pulled back, with his dry tongue licking the glass separating the two of them. His teeth had something red dripping down onto the floor and smearing on the suit, tie, and glass. His suit and tie both disheveled and even torn, revealing more pale skin underneath. The name tag looked like the dealer's tag, but with a different, unimportant name. All of his skin looked cold and clammy, like he spent an entire night out on the deck with nothing protecting him from the ocean. But the most disturbing thing was when Timothy noticed that the teller only had one hand on the glass, because he only had one hand to give to the glass. Where the other arm was, it was much shorter, but the hand was broken off with the fractured pieces of ulna and radius bones sticking out, looking like the hook of a pirate who lost their hand at sea. At the tips of the bones were some fresh crimson, but the wound itself and much of the bones was as brown as the earth, the blood long since dead and clotted. The red dripping from the monstrosity's mouth didn't belong to itself. Whatever that crashing noise was, it was the teller's dinner. And Timothy had a strong feeling that what it was eating was human. Another knock on the glass. The hand and stump struck across the glass together, and the bulletproof glass, advertised as robber-proof across the world, began to crack from the strength of the dead man's blows. A haunting moan, sounding like something that belonged to the deepest underwater trench, or possibly the deepest pit of hell, escaped its lips. As Timothy saw it draw its arms back to strike at the glass again. Backing away, watching the abomination strike at the glass, creating yet even more cracks, Timothy felt safer watching it as he backed away. Somehow he felt if he turned away that the teller would break through completely. So he wasn't looking where he was going when he tripped over a chair and he fell backwards. Slamming the back of his head to the ground, Timothy laid on the ground stunned. He must have laid there for some time, his thoughts too scattered to process what he was doing. It must have all been fake. Some kind of prank on him. Surely he was going to stand up, and there was going to be some kind of camera crew, and an annoying Share My Day personality that would announce how there was already over 1 million views, and Timothy would have to pretend that he already knew it was a prank. But standing up on his shaky legs, bracing himself against a card table, Timothy only saw the banker banging on the glass some more. The spiderweb of cracks were even wider than it was before, but the glass still held. No hidden cameras, no annoying personality, nothing but the dead man at the window, at least at first. But then Timothy noticed a figure who just entered the casino from the employees only area, stumbling through the shadows, seeking some super secret. Timothy, walking the best he could, on his shaking legs and bleeding from the back of his head, that he barely noticed. His first concern was to try to get help for himself. The dim thought of his son occurred to him, but he figured he had to get his chips exchanged for the coin of the 7 cities first. And then he could take himself to the infirmary. The kid zone would surely have a procedure for taking care of children when the parents were hurt, right? Excuse me? I think your teller is doing a prank of some kind. I really need to exchange my chips, and then I need to get to infirmary. I think I'm hurt pretty bad, Timothy said to the shadow that was turned away from him. At the sound of his voice, the figure stopped stumbling and stood stock still for a single second before it started to turn and face Timothy. It was the dealer from before, but there was something very wrong. Bruises ran up his face and neck, likely continuing further under his shirt. His belly was torn open, and blood was starting to thicken to an almost jelly-like substance. His entrails were dangling below his belt like some disgusting party favor, and his face was the most terrifying part yet. His eyes still had the blank stare that he had at the table, focusing on nothing but aware of everything. The right side of his face was normal as ever, not a blemish. Even when he pulled back his lips into a smile, there wasn't even a wrinkle on his right side. The left side of his face was a different story. His left eye had a splash of blood that was starting to scab over it, and still no tears lied in that dried eye. His left side was always smiling, The lips and the cheeks were chewed and torn away by some unknown adversary, possibly by the teller that still banged on the glass behind Timothy. "Are you okay?" Timothy asked the dealer, who only let out a breathy gasp, something that was barely even a word, something that caused every nerve in Timothy's body to freeze. "Help," the dealer rasped, taking step after staggering step towards Timothy. Not sure what to do, he stood still while the dealer collapsed into him. The blood from his face smeared into Timothy's good suit, and his cold breath barely puffing in and out, but washed over his face. "Ew, you're breathing on me, and your blood is just so gross," Timothy said to the dealer, who only said one word. "Help." "Fine, let's try to get you to the infirmary," Timothy said, wrapping one of the dealer's arms around his shoulder and trying to drag him along. His cold breath washed over Timothy's face like a rotten fog. "Okay, you really have to stop breathing on me, or I'm just going to leave you here and then I'll go get the nurse," Timothy warned the dealer. It looked like it worked also. The dealer's breath no longer washed across Timothy's face as he tried to carry and drag him to the infirmary. "Can't you at least try to help me a little?" Timothy asked the dealer. They had just left the casino and were now traveling down an eerie hallway. No one inside, and just like the casino, every other light was turned off. Apparently the cheap sea liner was trying to save money by keeping power costs low. Like constellations on a stormy night, these weak lights were all that guided Timothy to the red neon that marked the infirmary. "Come on, we're almost there," he said to the dealer, whose arm was starting to tighten painfully around Timothy. Still, even with the tight grip, Timothy was grateful that the dealer wasn't breathing in his face, even though their faces were just inches apart. "Can you loosen your grip? It's starting to hurt," Timothy asked the dealer, whose face turned to meet Timothy's gaze. Inches away, Timothy could see that the eyes were glazed over, and a milky white film coated them. His tongue dangled out of his damaged cheek, and his smile was still on his face. The dealer said breathlessly as his mouth opened, and he lunged at Timothy, knocking him down to the ground. The dealer's teeth tore into the meat of Timothy's upper arm. The pain was less than what Timothy was expecting, thank goodness, but the shock was worse than he was expecting. Laying there as the monster tore into him, thankfully his instinct to survive pushed him to tear his arm away. The dealer kept a large chunk of Timothy's flesh, enough to fill a handful of his own hands. Even with his prey gone, the cannibal continued to chew. Much of the meat spilled out of its torn cheek, only for it to be picked up and chewed again. The creature didn't care about its prey. Like a snake eating a lizard's tail, it got its meal, even if most of the prey escaped with its life. Now, with Timothy running the best he could, grabbing the ruined section of his upper arm through his torn shirt, trying to keep pressure on his wound while he traveled to the infirmary and slamming the door shut behind him. And sure enough, the infirmary, like everywhere else in the ship, was empty and only half lit, leaving Timothy to fend for himself. "What wheat?" he swore to himself while he checked the medical supplies. Bypassing the antibiotics, alcohol, and antiseptic, he grabbed the gauze and began to wrap his injured arm, It was already clotted over, but he didn't want to risk whatever happened to the dealer happening to him also. But he figured if he covered the injury, so whatever it was, wasn't going to transfer. Right? Still, even as he wrapped his arm in gauze, he realized that there was something wrong. Above and below the wound, blood vessels were starting to turn black. When he poked one of them with his finger, he realized that the blood vessel felt hard to his finger, but his own skin couldn't feel the finger. Whatever it is, it's spreading, he told himself. The infection was spreading, but that was only one symptom. The other symptoms he had a much harder time noticing. He didn't notice after he bandaged his wound, but he didn't hurt anymore. No pain anywhere in his body. His arm that was completely bitten was completely numb to all sensation, and the numbness was spreading. And with the lights low and very little all to see, he didn't notice as necrosis spread with the numbness. His skin starting to peel and weaken. He didn't notice that his breath was becoming cold, but he noticed when the air felt too hot, but he didn't notice pain, so he figured he had to be alright. I'll just stay here. Eventually the quarantine will end and the doctor can fix me. Michael will be okay. Michael, okay. Michael, soon. Timothy didn't notice as his heart slowed, growing weaker and weaker with every passing minute. His thoughts grew less crowded and more simple. One of his last coherent thoughts was about how he didn't even have the chance to cash in his winnings. Timothy didn't notice as he fell to the floor, his last breath taking on the floor, his eyes staring blankly at the door that he slammed shut, as his heart gave its desperate final beat. What woke up inside Timothy's body after he passed on didn't know things in the traditional sense. It felt hunger. Its senses saw no food, it heard no food, and it smelled no food. So what lived inside of Timothy pushed him to his feet and over to the door. It moved like a puppet with every string cut, but still it moved. The plague carrier and the plague were one and of the same. A malignant minion, mindless as its microscopic master. The deadly, dangerous, dead. The undead Timothy let out a raspy moan as it crashed against the door. By coincidence, not choice. Choice implies consciousness. Timothy was able to get the door open when he crashed into it. Picking himself up, the creature continued its prowl, letting out a louder moan, one that was echoed by others of its kind. They were not yet seen, but still they were heard. There were others like Timothy. They were waking up, and they were seeking, just like him. The creature turned and stalked towards its next location. Not a choice, not a memory, not even instinct, but coincidental chance guided Timothy to his next location. The location still had its lights on. It still had noise emanating from it, and the bacteria swimming through what was left of Timothy's brain and body were attracted to light and noise. Again, not a choice, but much like how with the right conditions will cause a bacterium to thrive, and that's what they would swim towards, that was what Timothy sought out. The fact that the only place left on the Naglfari that had lights and noise on was the kid zone, where his son was still at, something that never crossed the creature's non-existent mind. Nothing would cross Timothy's mind ever again. Another moan escaped Timothy's mouth, and this time it was met with even more echoes. The infection was spreading, and if the infection could think, it would have been pleased.